So welcome everyone. We're very glad to have you join us on this Wednesday for our webinar, Lean Agile Requirement Engineering in Large-Scale Complex Environments. My name is Miriam Stanley and I'm with the marketing team here at C-Prime. And joining me today is Peter Pedros, founder and CEO at PEDCO, who will share with us some actionable items that we can take back to our organizations to help us with the complexity of compliance and regulated environments. So without further ado, I'd like to let Peter take the reins. Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Miriam. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and a warm welcome from Switzerland. My name is Peter Pedros and I'm founder and CEO of PEDCO. In today's webinar, we discuss Lean Agile Requirements Engineering in large and regulated environments, and specifically an emerging practice which we call a solution-centric development. Many thanks to our partner C-Prime for hosting this session today. Before I start with the content, I would like to introduce myself. As I started at the age of 15 to program code for money, I've worked in almost all possible positions in IT in the last 35 years. From COBOL, assembler, to Smalltalk programmer, to tester, project lead, software architect, quality manager, and process responsible. I studied also software engineering, finance, and managed psychology, all at the University of Zurich in Switzerland. Before I founded PEDCO, I was working at the leading Swiss financial institute, where I was responsible worldwide for the entire set of life cycles, processes, methods, and tools used for 9,500 developers. We also had to comply with regulators from the FINMA, from the Swiss regulator, from the Fed, London and Singapore, and we also had to reach CMMI, maturity level 3 worldwide. As I like to talk about my work, I have given several publications and lectures. My first one was about distributed Smalltalk at the IBM conference in San Francisco in '95. And the last one was about scaled agility in regulated environments at the Agile in Automotive in Stuttgart some weeks ago. This is where Mercedes and Porsche are coming from. Of course, I'm also certified for the Scaled Agile framework and in disciplined Agile delivery, as well as the European Foundation for Quality Assurance and CMMI. As a part-time job, I am also president of the board for computer science at the Swiss Association of Quality and also a member of the board of directors there. The scaled lean agility is being adopted extensively throughout the industry. Building large-scale software and cyber-physical systems are one of the most complex and challenging endeavors in the industry today. And for that, I will lay out the context of such an environment and aspects of requirements in SAFe. There are some emerging practices from the industries like Automotive, MedTec and Finance, which approach this complexity in different manners. And it goes into a direction of where not the methodology determines the kind of the documentation, but the solution itself. And this leads into a separation of transient and solution objects. We call this practice the solution-centric development, and I would like to outline some of these aspects and discuss its pros and cons. What I'm talking to you is mostly based on our experience with applied SAFe, our implementation of SAFe as a process model. This webinar will be concluded by some lessons learned and a Q&A session. The last 10 years have seen the disappearance of well-known products and the arrival of new competitors in the marketplace. Who would have thought in 2007 that Nokia would disappear as one of the great brands in mobile phone and that Apple would take over the smartphone market almost over the night? With the rise of new competitors such as Uber, Tesla, Airbnb, Netflix, Google, Facebook, and others, we witnessed the rise of competitive pressures in all industries, and new levels of innovation and efficiency are required. As we combine such systems into cyber-physical systems with the Internet of Things, the Industry 4.0, this is a German term, lean startup, and Agile, we move into an increased complex and interdependent realm. Creating Agile teams has helped to get where we are today, but we also face limitations as small teams cannot build such complex systems in a timely manner. With this in mind, we also have to face regulatory and organizational environments, which are becoming more and more increasingly demanding. In the past, it was some kind of a gentleman's agreement, but these days have really changed. A study by Scott Ambler from Disciplined Agile Delivery shows that most Agile delivery teams, more than 65%, are already facing compliance requirements, either regulatory and or from their own organization. And given this situation, it is clear that we need a strategy and the governance to steer such an endeavor. This brand new study from version 1 lists the most used frameworks in scaled agility. It just came out 2 weeks ago, and it shows that about 50% of all projects are either SAFe or Scrum of Scrums. And if you take into consideration that some sort of Scrum of Scrum is also included on the program level of SAFe, this is the reason that we will show examples mostly based on experience with SAFe. Compared to the last year's survey, the number of internally created methods and Scrum of Scrum has decreased in favor of SAFe. That Disciplined Agile Delivery and less have increased their places, and I think that it's fair to say that the more formal methods are picking up. These are some results of the same study, and we see here the top 5 tips for success with scaling Agile. In turn, in 2017, internal Agile coaches was rated as the most important, followed by executive sponsorship. In 2018, consistent practices and process has now moved to second from third place to the year before. And to us, this is a strong indicator that SAFe is more and more really applied, and practices and processes are getting more attention. In our experience with applied SAFe, we see that regulated domains exhibit varying levels of criticality, from safety critical to security critical. A core characteristic of regulated environments is the necessity to comply with formal standards, regulations, directives, and guidance, specifically also for requirements engineering and its management, as we will see in the example of Automotive SPICE. There is a plethora of regulations and standards which apply across different regulated domains, as for example the ISO, the FDA Chapter 11, the IEC 62304, ISO 26262, and many more. These regulations are issued by a number of bodies or associations and are sometimes even region specifically. As software plays an increasingly important role in regulated environments, and it is sad to see that a lot of people say that Agile methods and regulated environments are fundamentally incompatible and therefore just don't apply Agile in regulated environments. It is our strong opinion, and also at the Swiss Association of Quality, that this is false, and Agile can indeed be applied in regulated environments, but it needs a defined logic. Thus, the granularity at which development processes are expressed and adopted requires careful tailoring to the specific regulated environments. For example, some will require full traceability and some not. In Agile, the talk is about the Agile Manifesto with 4 value propositions, which you already know: individuals and interactions over processes and tools, customer collaboration over contract negotiating, and responding to change over following the plan. If you take that into consideration, quality Agile processes follow a logic in a plan, do, check, act, manage cycle, where Some development is planned, done, results inspected, and adoptions are made to improve the process to solve any problems that may have arisen. And the principles of the Agile Manifesto do not include an overarching set of principles for regulated environments, but a number of core issues for software development in regulated environments may be inferred. And these issues include quality assurance, safety and security, effectiveness, traceability, and verification and validation. In practice, we need to have a quality, we need to have a managed process and an established quality management system. We need to talk about safety and security. We need to have transparency in execution and continuous compliance. We need to have a responsive planning and risk management to mitigate safety risks for users. All reference models, funny, and this is really funny, talk about that you need to manage the process and the solution barriers. You need to reduce waste in your process and do exactly what is needed. It is not okay to just define a huge process and say all projects, all endeavors will comply with that. And what we also need is to have some kind of traceability. We need to ensure that process and product compliance is reached as well. And of course, we are talking about verification and validation, that we have engineering based on principles and real practices so that we know how a product is specified, designed, built, and tested in accordance with the regulations. Based on the criteria presented in the slide before, we built our product Applied Safe. It allows to implement safe, fast, and precise, as it includes a comprehensive process models with roles, activities, templates, guidelines, metrics, tailoring, milestones, and phases. And as you can independently instantiate on each level, you can customize with the built-in tailoring and run multiple concurrent process variations. And of course, you can extend, adopt, and integrate with your own process assets. It includes the complete content of Scaled Agile framework, and each version is elaborated in sync with future versions of SAFe, and of course, officially approved by Scaled Agile. It includes some compliance mechanisms and capabilities for regulated environments, as well as a complete implementation of relentless improvement. Now let's move to the topic of solution development in SAFe from the perspective of requirements engineering. And what we see here is an overview to the solution development in SAFe. As a requirements engineer, I can see that the solution is delivered by the value stream, which is realized by the people from the Agile release trains. And most interesting for a requirements engineer is that the solution intent captures the goal of the solution and allows to explore and define the fixed and variable requirements, which are in part derived from the solution context. The customer interacts with the solution builder to clarify the intent, validate assumptions, and reviews progress. Solution management and the architects help to drive the development, make scope and priority decision, and manage the flow of features and capabilities and non-functional requirements. And this is the key of requirements engineering. If we go further in a detail of the previous slide, we see here an element of SAFe, which is called the solution intent. The solution intent manages the product itself. It includes the product lifecycle management as well. And when you build a system that has an unacceptable high cost of failure, one significant barrier to the Agile adopted is the need for a more rigorous definition and validation of system behavior. While many practitioners resonate with the Agile Manifesto value statement of working solutions over comprehensive documentation, those can become conflicting priorities for enterprises, which need both. Engineering of complex and highly reliable solutions requires and creates large amounts of technical information. Much of this information reflects the intended behavior of a solution. Features, capabilities, stories, non-functional requirements, system architecture, domain-level models and designs, for example, for electrical and mechanical engineering, interfaces, customer specifications, test results, traceability, and more. In many cases, this information must become part of the official record, whether it's out of necessity or regulation itself. And building systems for which behavior must be ensured, including the life's critical systems, mission critical systems, and other systems governed by regulatory standards for documents, traceability is a means to help ensure that the system behaves as intended. Traceability connects the elements of solution intent to each other and to the components of the system that realize the full system behavior. In easy speaking, the solution intent contains what the current system does now and what changes are intended for a future state. So this example here is a part of a domain model, and it also shows the relation relevant for requirements engineering. For example, the solution. This is a word which is commonly used, but what means that in reality? We see here that it's made out of the current solution and the future solution. And how can a company ensure that several hundred people from various trains have the same picture or the same relations in mind as we see right here? And such things needs to be defined clearly. So if we are talking about solution intent, we see here that the solution intent imposes the future solution, and we see that we have requirements which are either a non-functional requirement or a backlog item. And all backlog items in SAFe are either story, capability, and feature. The solution intent itself is steered by the solution vision, and the solution vision steers also the solution roadmap. And this is something that needs to be clear for all participants in scaled agility. In support of bringing the benefits of lean and agile development for complex systems, SAFe provides also a scalable requirements model as a way to express system behavior with epics, capabilities, features, stories, and non-functional requirements. These artifacts largely replace traditional system and requirement specifications with new paradigms based on lean agile development. These newer paradigms are intended to avoid focusing too early on a point solution. And this is based on not to pick specific requirements and designs far too early in the learning process. It rather leaves room for an emerging understanding based on intent and not specificity. For example, a feature is described by a phrase, a benefit hypothesis, and an acceptance criteria. A story is elaborated by a user voice statement and acceptance criteria. Also, patterns and relationship for attributes, acceptance guidelines, and testing are included to support the NFRs that are also imposed on the world's most important systems. Taken together, it's a comprehensive model, as we see here. But most practitioners, they only need to see a portion of these items. For example, agile teams primarily work with user stories, story acceptance tests, and NFRs. And each element is defined to provide the right amount of expression of behavior and testing at the various levels of SAFe, as of portfolio, large solution, program, and team. You may say that this model appears complex, but that just reflects contemporary solution development at scale, which is indeed complicated, even with agile methods. Of course, if an element is not needed, then it doesn't need to be used. For example, capabilities are only needed if they have the large solution level. However, teams and programs that are building world-class enterprise solutions at the highest possible quality can probably apply most of these elements. There is also help published in form of various guidance papers, such as a CMMI Guide to Scrum and others. For example, here the famous Tier 45 paper from the AAMI, the Association for the Advancement of Medical Instrumentation. We have here the link, and we really recommend this paper as it describes how agile practices can be applied and developments still comply with medical device development regulations, such as the FDA Chapter 11 requirements. As we can see in this example, this guidance paper also talks about incremental development of stories and does not impose that a big upfront specification needs to be built. We are very proud that one of the authors, Dr. Jochen Jäger, is also a member in our advisory board. This is now a real down-to-earth example of how to deal with regulated requirements and how to link to a defined process element. We start here with the requirements of automotive SPICE. If we look at the example of requirement specification, specifically 1703 stakeholder requirement, we see what is expected and needs to be defined. Up here is all the content from the reference model for that requirement. The lower part then really says if and how strong this requirement is sustained with the actual defined process assets, such as work products and more. For example, non-functional requirements, as stated in 1703, are reflected on the program level with program NFRs. Such a mapping is definitely something that an auditor likes to see, and sometimes they even kiss your feet if they see something like that. We think that working with such a reference model is not a burden. They rather represent a huge book of knowledge and build on past things that really went wrong. So for us, it's a very good practice to take an applicable model to assess your own processes, even if it's not required from the regulatory. Miriam, there is a poll question.
All right, let's start the poll. And our first poll is, does your organization have to comply with regulated environments? And your options are yes, and we are struggling with that. Yes, we have a strategy and it works fine. We don't do Agile because we are in a regulated environment. Or no, you don't have to comply. Or 5, you don't know. And we'll give everybody a few seconds to answer the poll. And Peter, I can tell you just from looking at the results that about half of our respondents are, and I will close the poll out and let's see where we stand.
I can't see the poll,
Yep.
Miriam.
Can you see it now?
No.
Okay, well, we can see, I'll just relate it to you. We can see that about 40% of our respondents are struggling with complying with regulated environments. And then 5%, interestingly, they don't do Agile altogether because they are in a regulated environment. So do these results surprise you?
Okay. Yeah, the 5%, I hear that often, but believe me, it's really something that can be done, and you can benefit from the promises of agile and scaled agility in regulated environments as well. If you read that tier paper or the CMMI guide to Scrum, you can see that this is really supported. And 40% are struggling. This is we had the same thing at Credit Suisse, where when I was working there, that a lot of agile people are telling you, well, that's just not the agile way of developing, and this is nothing for us. And then you get a lot of pushback. And this is why I want to come up with that emerging practice, which I will talk about in a moment. 40%. What are the other percentages, Miriam?
So 8% don't know, and then 22% say that they don't have to comply with regulated environments.
You're lucky, but use the reference models, because they're really a good thing to improve your processes and what you need to have as well. Okay, yeah, Miriam, is there more?
I was just going to say that 25% do have a strategy and it works fine, which is also good news.
Great. This is gorgeous. Yeah. Okay. Good. then I wonder if you already know that the emerging practice, which is the solution-centric development. And this is something that we first encountered at one of the major Swiss financial institutes. And there we had a problem with a system called WS80, Wertschriften 80. This is a trading solution which has set into production in 1980 and was enhanced since then with permanently about 100 developers. So there were billions of dollars spent into that system, and of course, a lot of documentation and requirements in various forms already written. So the question was, so how to deal with changing the requirements, and what do we do with the existing documents? And this led us to the practice which we call now the solution-centric development. And we have seen that now that similar practices are used in other industry, like in MedTech and Automotive as well. So here comes the problem statement. If you think as a requirements engineer and you imagine yourself, you have to start a new job in a large company. So what do you expect? Will you work in a greenfield approach? Is it rather a lean startup and you don't know what it will be in the future? Or do you really know that the solution needs to be maintained and third enhanced for the next 20 years to come? Or will you add or change requirements to a big existing documentations, which probably Nassi-Schneiderman diagrams or use case model and so forth? In the case of number 2 and 3, you have to come up with a strategy and how to incorporate the fact that people working on this solution will change. They may even just be in the kindergarten right now, so you will document for them as well. And will the new feature, which is basically a new alternative flow in a use case, be described as a feature with some stories, and the existing use case will not be touched? Will the new business rules be described as a simple story? What happens to the large complex business rule document? You need to know how to handle that and what is acceptable, not for you, not only for you, but also for the company in the long run. For these kind of questions, a solution-centric development approach comes into play. And there's another poll, Miriam.
All right, for our second poll, our question is your organization required to further develop or maintain solutions that have large existing documentation? Your choices are no, no, but you have solutions with long lifetimes, over 10 years. Yes, and they're all agile with stories. Yes, you have existing old documentation that must be maintained, such as use cases, Nassi-Schneider diagrams, etc. Or yes, you have existing documentation, but it's mixed depending on the life cycles. So we'll give everyone a few seconds to answer the poll. Couple more seconds. All right, I'm closing out the poll and the results. So about 3% of our attendees are not required to maintain solution, but half of our respondents have existing documentation, but it's mixed depending on the life cycles. And then we're broken up evenly 20-20 between yes, all agile with stories, and yes, all documentation that must be maintained. So again, Peter, do those results surprise you?
No, they don't surprise me, and sometimes it surprises me with the all agile with stories, because if I'm thinking about big solutions where several hundred people are working, then you easily get within 2-3 years more than 10,000 user stories. And if it's all just prosa text, do you really still have that under control is a question for us. And the mixing the old documentation, this is like the most common case we have here, because large companies have already large systems in place and they have to cope with that. Thank you very much for your answers. And as we have seen in the past, a complete upfront documentation of requirements is neither practical nor enforceable. And what we see here is an overview as a skeleton to build up requirements with a natural evolution. And we see here an analogy in architecture. And this is a possible solution. We start with a useful patchwork documentation based on a skeleton, which can be completed step by step. For example, a first version would just be a small domain model and a use case model. In the next generation, you may add a floor, which represents a use case or a flow in a use case. And if you document like that, then you need some guidelines to build up such an evolutionary and incremental documentation. Some companies, one in the Netherlands, they even decided to not specify acceptance criteria for their stories, but they directly trace from there to the right point into the skeleton. The skeleton must hold all attributes to scale up and support the needed flexibility and support for variations. For that, an agile approach is best to comply with. And one discussion topic that we face sometimes as well is that applications are either already existing, they include a lot of diagrams, structured diagrams, Nasse-Schneiderman diagrams, use case models, and so on, and they have a long expected lifetime. So depending on the attributes of a solution, it might be necessary to extend the definition of done and adapt to existing documentations. We work a lot with the DoDs, and in such a special case, you would consider features and stories as so-called transient objects or change requests, and use it as a trigger to edit the existing documentation, the permanent solution objects. So we have here stories, and they're just are triggering new additional alternatives flow in a use case or no use cases. And with each new stories, you add new additional behavior and trace back to the triggering story. The flow is based on Agile with the features and stories still, but these are only used as a trigger to update requirements, code, tests, and its documentation. And criteria for a solution-centric approach is to make transparent what the solution must sustain over the long run. The best practice is to establish decisions, and here we have some typical criteria. This is the expected lifetime, existing solution and documentation, business criticality, intended use internally or externally, safety classification, is it a class A, B, or C in IC 62304, or the security classification is you think about the HIPAA reference model, expected maintenance and complexity of a solution, size, and previously used life cycles. And some best practices here is that you extend the DoDs, the definition of done, to the existing documentation. You make decision transparency also for the auditors. You define a decision table in order to have consistent decisions and to model the meta model domain, and even for each type of solution. Tailor to the needs of the solution rather than the life cycles, and all on that, don't be dogmatic. We see here an example of a real-world example of a work product model which describes the domain and shows the main objects and their relationships. Different process areas have different colors, and for example, pink for requirements engineering. And such a model needs to be in sync with its producing processes and is a visualization of its results. It's a communication media of any subject matter discussion within the domain and beyond. It helps to visualize key information. For example, we see here that there are transient objects, these are the blue ones, or the solution objects, which are the orange ones, if they're mandatory here with the M, or if they're tailorable, yes or no. So this is all kind of information which we had in such a model. And such different behavior can be driven with definitions of done. And I guess that we are all aware of definitions of done for stories. And the definition of done is an agreed list of criteria that will be met for each story. And without that, we don't have a consistent meaning of done, and velocity cannot be estimated. One very interesting point in scaled agility is that we not only talk about the story definition of done, but also on the scaled level as of team, system, team, systems, solution, and releases. And here's a representation of SAFe, and we talk about specific DoDs for release, as required by the business, solution at least every PI, system increment at least every iteration, and team increment at least every iteration. And of course, we might have even definitions of done for features, capabilities, and epics. In automotive, for example, the V model is the most commonly used approach for engineering. And teams, and especially requirements engineering, are facing milestones, for example, like here, requirements freeze. Now, it's just a reality, and it can't be negotiated. You can't negotiate with Volkswagen. So new kind of approaches needs to be met. And this is something that the skeleton approach works really well. We use iterations, and within them, we reach these milestones as well. So with such mini increments, we learn and fail fast, and this is what Agile is all about. So I would like to summarize our lessons learned from several customers, and depending on the characteristics of a solution to be built, you may consider different flavors of documentation and approaches. For example, lifetime, business criticality, existing documentation, size of solution, expected people turnover, and time to market. A set of solution types help, and the decision table helps to select the right Agile requirements engineering approach. You base decisions on given facts and let it determine what kind of requirements documentation is needed. This is a decision table then. Design the solution for small batches, and you should demonstrate compliance and correctness in each iteration and in small iterations. And you should avoid quality depth. And you don't build in compliance at the end of development. You do that with each iteration, and just treat audits like normal, as a part of a normal system demo. Continue to teach, train, coach, and we think that Agile quality management systems and reference models are tools and not a burden. So you define clearly which activities occur on which level. So there are some good practices. Define guidance on DoDs. A lot of different behavior can be handled for each endeavor, for each project. And none of these approaches require a big upfront design. You shouldn't document at the end and avoid any technical depth. And as I said, some companies replace the acceptance criteria with pointers to the requirement specification directly. With each system demo, all jobs related to an iteration should be concluded, and you should avoid pausing behavior or replacing good judgment by processes. With that, I'm finished with my presentation, and before I start with the questions and answer session, I just wanted to remind you that we are next week in the Detroit area. We are at the Agile in Automotive in Novi on May 15th, and the Agile and Beyond together with Cprime in Ypsilanti from May 16th to 18th. Hope like to see you there, and now I would like to hand over to Miriam. Miriam, do we have some questions?
Yes, we do, Peter. Thank you so very much. So if you have any questions, please enter them in your questions pane, and we will try to get to as many of the questions as we can. So we have a question from Francine. She asks, from a quality perspective in regulated environments, is that all that's needed for requirements engineering, or do we need more?
Well, this is a little bit what I said in that slide where I said that we need to have a quality and defined processes, and if we have defined processes, then we need to tailor them to the specific needs, and we need to map that to the reference models, and then we need to show how we do the practicing. This was where at the beginning where I showed the different reference models, and if you have that in place, you're pretty fine with that, and you know what you're doing, because what an auditor usually wants to see, they only want to see that you know what you're doing, you do what you say, and you have done so, and that you can prove that. This is all what you want to see, and this is what it needs. I hope this answers the question. Otherwise, please ask again. Miriam, are there other questions?
Yeah, and I think a relevant question with regard to technology that helps us to do these things. So Michael asks, how do the off-shelf products like Jira, for example, map to the Epic and the stories on the data model that you showed? And then do you find that some map better than others with regard to compliance?
Yeah, in our opinion, that was our experience at Credit Suisse. You know, when you have like 9,500 developers, if we talk about Jira, we are talking about tools. And in the model which I showed, we just say there are stories or there are features and capabilities, and they have a relation. And this is the consistent part of a life cycle. Now we can say that some teams, they work with Jira, other with Team Foundation Service, but they have the same understanding of how that relates. And what we did, and what you can do now is you can say, hey, we have 3 or 4 different standard tools in a company, and the teams can choose which they want to use out of the past of the existing code, for example, existing documentation, to use that tool or another tool, but they still have the same domain model in mind. So I would strongly recommend that you differentiate between what you're doing, the work products, the objects, the solution objects, and how you represent them in tools. And this can be done with various different tools in place. I hope this answers the questions. I know that the reality is sometimes complex. We had 4 standard requirements management tools in one leading Swiss financial institute, and we still managed to have like 5 exceptions to other tools. So we had always a lot of different tools for the same work to do.
Okay, now Peter, we have a more global question with regard to SAFE. So Pankaj asked, with SAFE advocating for built-in quality within the Agile teams, where do the quality departments fit in, especially with regard to compliance?
Mm-hmm. The quality department fits in on an enterprise level. This is the small button where you look at the Scaled Agile framework. I can show. I can turn off the camera. Turn on the camera now again. I hope you see me. You see here the big picture, the full SAFE configuration, and up here is the enterprise. And of course, here you have the whole organization for the quality management departments. They have the processes of how to develop the processes for all the levels, how they can build the quality in the teams, but you have to define those mappings to the reference models, the activities, the work products in all those life cycles, the roles. This is done by the quality management department here on the enterprise level. And of course, they're doing also process assessments and training and skills management and all that stuff. So this is usually represented on the enterprise level. Of the example for applied SAFE, our biggest level is the enterprise level and not the other levels in SAFE. And this is what it needs in regulated environments. This is a really good question. Thank you very much. Yeah, I hope that answers the question. Are there other questions?
Okay, so we have another question related to kind of the higher level. Matthew asked, how do you come about a single roadmap and vision, and how do you share that architecture and delivery for a large enterprise, say a bank?
How do I share a vision?
And maybe we can limit the question to, with regard to compliance, so let's say in a financial institution.
A vision, this is something that I haven't seen so much that how to do it, that there are specific definitions of how this is done. Usually this is just some kind of words and a document. But what I see strongly is the software architecture. This is something that is quite defined. And what we use several times is that we either refer to the ESPMA framework, the International Standard for Process Management, or the TOGAF, the description, which is from the Software Engineering Institute in Pittsburgh. And the TOGAF TOGAF model describes of how you should document and define your architecture. And on the architecture level, I think it's pretty much well defined. On the vision level, it's more or less open space which you can conquer, where you just define it with pictures and text. This is my experience. Hope that helps a little bit for that question.
Okay, Peter, now we have a kind of a specific question on one of the slides that you presented. Prasad asks, in the example of the model that had the blue and the orange objects where you were defining the architecture, are the product names always the same?
Yes, that if possible. There is, we try for that when we define such a model. And that model you have seen, that was basically the first version was based on the iterative approach. This was based on the rational unified process some years ago, and we took that as the leading names, and we had so-called a translation table which was underneath the model for the various names in the different life cycles. For example, in waterfall we ask for a so-called a risk list. That was a defined artifact. And in Agile, you don't have risk lists, but of course you're dealing with risks. And this is something that we took out of such a model, and we just said, hey, all the life cycles are dealing with risks. And the risk list is just a specific report on that. So these reports are life cycle specific and transient objects, of course, and they would be blue then as well. But if possible, we always kept the same names. Hope that answers the question.
Okay, great, thank you. And then we have a question specifically about the Applied Safe product. Can that support any sorry, I'm losing the, any compliance, any particular type of compliance?
Yes, we have bindings to Automotive SPICE, to IEC 62304, to the Chapter 11, to the FDA requirements, and to CMMI. We have a complete binding of course as well. It was when we built Applied Safe, it was we started with reaching CMMI maturity level 5 out of the box. This was our goal, and since then we have learned that most reference models, they're basically asking for the same things, having a defined process there. That's like the first question from the quality model, having a defined process, know what you're doing, having defined tools, practices, and metrics in place, and prove that you have done so.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Peter. So we've come to the end of our questions. I want to thank Peter very much for giving us a great presentation today. And I'd like to thank you all very much for taking the time to join us today on this Wednesday, and we hope you found this session of value. And as mentioned before, we will be sending out the recording of the presentation as well as the slides, and we hope to see you soon in one of our other webinars. We appreciate your time and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.